Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. We are super excited to be here. I don't think I've ever been in this building before, which is so exciting. It's really nice. I'm McKaylee Glennon, and I am a senior research scientist at the Adirondack Watershed Institute. And Tom Collins is our outreach and education coordinator, as you heard from Colleen, and we're from Paul Smith College. I'll tell you a little bit about our program, and tonight we're going to share with you one of the projects we have going on at AWI. So we're going to talk about a project called Wool and Water tonight. And this is a project that we've had going on for a couple of years now, but I'll just take a minute first to tell you about AWI and Paul Smith College. If you don't know Paul Smith College, we're the only four-year college in the Adirondack Park. And we are known quite well for things like natural resource management and forestry and culinary. Very strong school in that respect. And AWI is a program of Paul Smith College. We've been around for 25 some years. And AWI is known primarily for, we care very much about protecting clean water and healthy watersheds. And the two programs I think most folks recognize us by are long-term water quality monitoring. We run something called the Adirondack Lake Assessment Program, which samples a variety of lake parameters throughout the Adirondacks each summer. And that's about a 25-year program at this point. And our aquatic invasive species spread prevention program. So the folks in the blue vests that are out on boat launches in the park, and over here we have a big program that similarly has a long history of doing spread prevention. As Colleen mentioned, I'm a little bit of an outlier in that I am a terrestrial wildlife ecologist who works for a watershed organization. So I am the person who does a bunch of terrestrial research, and this is one of the projects I do, but I also, in addition to primary research of my own that uses wildlife sort of as a lens on the Adirondack landscape and the intactness of uplands, I also do some work that just takes advantage of long-term data sets that we have collected through the stewardship program, for example. So I do a little bit of a mix of different things. And on this project, I get to work with Tom a lot, which is terrific. So Wool and Water began, what is 2 or 3 years ago now, initially as sort of an idea that we were tossing around during a grant meeting one day. Wouldn't it be fun if we could try to do something with this? I'm the chief fiber obsessed person at our office. So we came up with this idea, and lo and behold, managed to get some funding from the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership, and subsequently a larger grant from the Basin Program, and also a little bit of support from Northern New York Audubon to do what we're calling a data art project. And we are using fiber art, in this case, knitting, crochet, weaving, to illustrate issues relating to water quality and changing water quality conditions in the Lake Champlain Basin and in the Adirondack Park. I'm going to take 1 second now to do a little bit of a survey before I get into telling you more of the details of this, because this is my favorite prop. I want to get a show of hands to know how many people came to this talk tonight because you are a knitter or a crocheter or a weaver, or you're somehow, at least a couple, it's kind of okay, a few more hesitating, raising their hands. Is there anybody who is sort of my level of involved with yarn and fiber and knitting, in that you usually have yarn within like a 10-foot radius of your body? Is anybody at that level? I can usually find at least one person. How many people in that crowd? It looks like it might only be you brought a project with them. How many might be in that group but didn't bring a project and wish they did? Well, I've got a project. This is a little something that we pass around during the presentation, because nothing makes me happier than seeing people knitting while I'm talking about knitting. So if you would like to, any of you, knit or crochet, there's a collaborative scarf in here. There are many different colors of yarn. There's a crochet one, there's a knitting one. and you're welcome to make a contribution to the collaborative scarves if you would like to. Because it's great to see you out there doing that. I'm a firm believer in normalizing knitting during meetings and all that kind of thing. So by way of introduction, I want to talk just for a minute about why AWI is involved in this project, because we are generally not known as an art entity of any kind, but known as a science and research institute. And I'll just say that if you grew up in the era that I did, at least, and maybe still, we grew up sort of being told or being reminded in various ways that we were either sort of left-brained or right-brained types of individuals, and people that, you know, are like Leah, our colleagues Leah and Jolene, you know, are on one side of this and driven by things like logic and ideas, and they're good at math and they're good at science. And then on the other side, we have left brain people who are the artsy types, who are, you know, much more into driven by emotion and creativity and passion. And you sort of were told, at least as far as I can remember from filling out those dumb surveys in magazines, that you were either one or the other. And if you were good at math, then that meant you couldn't be an artsy person. And if you were an artsy person, you're like, oh, I can't do science, it's too hard. But it turns out that that's completely baloney. And actually our brains benefit very much from sort of integration of these two sides. And so I will just say that we're doing this in part because it works. Just by way of illustration, this is our same colleague, Leah, and she is, in addition to being a scientist who does work in our lab, she's also an artist. She does the cool block prints that you see on the top there, and she plays the oboe. She is the one, if you've followed our social media or seen this on any of our posts, she just came back from Antarctica. She's been to Antarctica multiple times. She's been to the Arctic as well. That's a picture of her in her beloved Arctic with her beloved oboe, which she just took with her to Antarctica also, because for some reason she needed to sort of combine that scientific endeavor with her love of playing the oboe. Similarly, here is me in one of my long-term peatlands in which I have monitored bird populations in the Adirondacks for the past 15 years, wearing a sweater that's called the bog jacket that I had to knit because the pattern was called the bog jacket. And then I had to put my rusty blackbird on it, and then I had to wear it out into the bog. I just had to, I didn't have a choice. So there's something happening here. And people say things like that to us. I wouldn't have got this if you had shown it to me on a graph, but you know, for whatever reason, I get it in this format. So we're doing this in part because people have just been so receptive to it, and we've been able to secure funding for it. We've had it in an exhibit traveling around the region, and it's enabled us to reach a bunch of new people. And that's the most exciting and fun part of it. And not just from here in the watershed. I had somebody find me in Finland through Ravelry. I had somebody find me from California. So it's a great way to reach out to a network of folks. So this is a data art project, for lack of me knowing a better name to call it by, but that's what we've been calling it. It is primarily for us an education and outreach tool. It is collaborative. I am trying to get as many people to participate as I possibly can. So if you're at all interested, I'll tell you exactly how to get involved. And by virtue of its being collaborative, it's a network of people. And that, again, is my favorite part of it. It is a traveling exhibit. It's been in a bunch of places. It's kind of moving around anywhere that we can find folks that are interested in hosting it. And one of my other favorite things about it, I would say, is that I think it is giving people a chance to maybe engage with environmental issues that they care about and express their feelings about those issues in a way that feels maybe not threatening, but a little bit like activism. For example, you know, we imagine my ultimate fantasy for this project is that we all get together and create a piece about some issue that we really care about. Let's say it's road salt or harmful algal blooms. We all sort of make some projects around that. And then we take that to Albany and we knock on the door to the legislators and say, the knitters are coming. Can you imagine how much fun that would be? I think this gives people a chance to feel like they're doing a little bit of activism, but in yarn format, which really doesn't feel very threatening at all. So that is another reason why I think people are engaged in this project. So I'll take some time and show you some pictures of things that are in the collection. They are very illustrative of the sorts of things that AWI is trying to protect and keep in our watershed. And they have to do basically with things like all the way from basic limnological concepts to sort of presenting actual data sets that came from the Basin program or came from our work, all of which sort of tells the story of protecting clean water. So again, these are just some of the topics, and I'll give you some examples of those. Some of them have actual data and some of them are really simple. We'll start with sort of the simple end of things. You all know, I'm sure, that when you go swimming in our lakes in the summertime, your feet are colder than your head. And you do this thing where you try to put your whole body in sort of the upper 1 foot of the water column because that's where it's warm. That's because the lake is stratified. This is what happens in our lakes in the summertime. The sunshine heats them up, and then we develop these sort of thermal layers where we have the epilimnion, the warmest layer, the metalimnion, and then the hypolimnion where it's cold at the bottom of the lake. This hat is just illustrating those different layers of stratification. What happens in the wintertime as we lose the sunlight and it gets cooler, we lose the sort of thermal boundary between those layers, and eventually they break down and the lake mixes. Sometimes that's referred to as turnover. And if you turn this hat over, the other side has no layers on it, which is reflective of what the lakes are like. Most of our lakes are like during the winter time. So that's the stratification hat. The mitts sort of show the same thing. One of them is the summer, one of them is the winter. The actual beads on them are the temperature profiles. That is just some data that I took from our floating platform that shows sort of what the temperature looks like at those different stages. But this is basically just illustrating the idea of stratification. Here's another one that's pretty simple, no actual data, but all I did here was to represent bathymetry, which is basically sort of the underwater analog of topography. This is a beautiful map that the Ausable River Association has on their website. I just made a bunch of crochet circles and represented it as kind of a crochet bathymetric map of Mirror Lake. This is the lake that I grew up on and spent all my time in. And you'll see a lot of actual projects that are representing Mirror Lake because it's a long-term study site and research lake for us. This is a piece that is, I think, really goofy, but for whatever reason, people like it a lot. So I'll talk about it. This is it's about this big, a felted piece. I'm not really sure what it is. I guess it could be a placemat. I guess it could be a plant holder. I don't know. But at any rate, what I did to create this is to represent the dissolved oxygen profile in the South Basin of Upper Saranac Lake, as you can see in the bottom right-hand graphic. That is information from our 2018 Upper Saranac Lake report, representing what happens to dissolved oxygen during the summertime in that lake. These are data that come from our floating platform that's out in the lake all summer. I'm not sure what the timer interval is, but every, half an hour or something, maybe it's a shorter interval than that, that floating platform sends down a probe and measures a whole bunch of things in the lake. It floats around in the deep hole in Upper Saranac. One of the things that it measures is dissolved oxygen. And so our colleague Corey created these maps in the 2018 report representing what the dissolved oxygen looks like throughout the summertime. So you'll see in the left of the graphic in June, that's sort of after the lake has turned over or mixed relatively soon after that. There's a bunch of oxygen distributed all throughout the water column. Throughout the course of the summer, because of those thermal stratification layers, the oxygen at the bottom layer gets used up by biological processes. The main source of oxygen for the lake is from the atmosphere, and those sort of thermal stratification layers can be quite a barrier to that. And so this is a natural process. The fish and other sort of biological things happening in the lake are using up the oxygen, and eventually the concentration of it declines to the fall. And so the bright red part is where we get a very low oxygen condition. This is a sort of natural process, but in some cases it can be exacerbated and made worse by things like road salt, for example. But you can imagine that if you are a cold water fish that needs to be at the bottom of the lake because you need it to be cold, you might run into some problems looking for cold habitat, but at the same time running into, not enough oxygen because of these hypoxic sort of conditions that can develop. So I just took that graphic, turned it into a pattern, knitted it, and then felted it because I think felting is just as much fun as knitting. So that's the dissolved oxygen mat. Harmful algal blooms. I'm sure everybody has heard about harmful algal blooms, and we're going to hear more about them. They are becoming sort of a much more visible and prevalent problem, and probably that's going to continue to increase with warming temperatures. This bag has the number of harmful algal blooms that were reported in Adirondack lakes beginning 2012 and going to 2020, and it's sort of a graph wrapped around a cylinder, so it's a little bit hard to see, but the number of little blobs on there is the number of blooms in Adirondack lakes, starting at the top in 2012 when it was like 4 or 5, and going to 2020 when it got up to 15, I believe. So that's the HAB bag. This piece is, I think I'm starting in summer and going sort of through to winter. This is another summertime sort of piece that I think about working on during the summer months. This is called Plankton. This is a representation of changing zooplankton communities in Lake Champlain, and it's based on the work of Tim Myhook and his students in this lake. They have tracked phytoplankton and zooplankton diversity for a long time, and what they're finding is that over time we are seeing an increased prevalence of cyanobacteria, of blue-green algae, and that is resulting in a decrease in both the abundance and diversity of zooplankton. So again, this is more of a concept than an actual data set. If you go in the paper, you can see what the graphs look like, but what you're meant to see in this piece is that as you move from left to right, you can imagine that the blue-green ones are my rendering of cyanobacteria increasing, blue-green algae increasing in the lake over time, and at the same time, a decrease in the multicolored yarn pieces, which are meant to be zooplankton, causing a decline in their abundance and diversity. And of course, cyanobacteria is what's involved in those same harmful algal blooms, and it is sort of exacerbated by things like warmer temperatures and by nutrient inputs into the lake. Here's another summertime one. These are data right from the State of the Lake report. This is number of beach closures from Champlain beaches. And this is figure 2 in last year's State of the Lake report. This is a piece that has each row representing a day between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So basically the summertime. There's no significance to the color other than to make you think about the idea of moving, off the beach and deep into the water. But as you can see, there are beads in some of those rows. So you think about each row being a day, and the beads represent one of those beaches being closed, either from coliform or from cyanobacteria. So it's a little hard to see in the picture, but the sort of at the end of the sandy color, that's about the end of June, and that's when this first starts to occur. And then you move off further throughout the summer, and you can see when you get into the warmer months, especially July, August, and even into September, a larger number of those beads showing up. This is 3 years of data condensed into one, but I think the largest number of beads in any given row is something like 7 or 8. So and there's probably, I don't know, 16, 17 on that list. So that's not a trivial number of beaches that might be closed as a result of those issues. Again, nutrient pollution and climate warming temperatures can both contribute to this particular issue. Now, we, as mentioned, run a big aquatic invasive species spread prevention program. It's been going on for a long time. We're at 50 or 60 lakes. Every summer, we hire 115 or so people. So we have a lot of data from the boat launches, which of course gives me the opportunity to create launch codes. Sometimes I like to make stuff just so I can use a goofy name in this project. Our data are all collected by stewards in what's called WISPA, the Watercraft Students Program application, which is a tablet, and they answer a bunch of questions. When you launch your boat at a launch, you get to speak with one of our stewards, and that they collect data that are very important for us to sort of model how invasive species are moving through our system. But it also presents us with an opportunity to look at what these data might look like in various forms, like knitted or woven. So in both of these cases, these are representations of what's happening at a boat launch in a particular location or over a particular period of time. This one on the bottom is a weaving, and it's really ugly because I don't know how to weave, but I wanted to try it. So In both of these, there's primarily two colors, blue and green. One of those is launching boats and the other one is retrieving boats. So we're all, we're intercepting the boats that are launching and we're intercepting the boats that are coming back. So that's one data point. That's just how many are either launching or retrieving that we log by our stewards. And then you'll see a row. In both cases, it's easier to see on the top than on the bottom. Sometimes there'll be green in there. That means a boat showed up with something on it, some kind of organism. But in that case, it was a native thing that we weren't worried about. But sometimes there are rows that have pink. I think in the bottom one, it's orange. It's really hard to see in the bottom piece. Those are boats that showed up with something bad, with an aquatic invasive species that we are trying to prevent in the lake. The bottom one is data from Meacham Lake in 2020, and it is about this long. And I calculated if we were to weave with that same skinny yarn, all the boats that we intercepted in 2020, all of us being the Basin Program and AWI and Lake George, in 2020, that weaving would be something like 400 feet long. So we interact with a lot of boaters. The top one is a little bit of a different picture. Those are launch codes all from the same day. They're all from July 4th. I think it's 2018. So that gives you a different perspective of how many boats show up at a given launch. I think our busiest one is Fourth Lake, and the shortest one, the least busy launch, I think, is Louis Lake. I can't see very well, but so the length is, how many boats did we interact with? How many of them showed up with bad things on them? I don't really know what you would do with these, but they're sort of fun to make anyway. I've made some in scarf format as well. Here's another way you might represent species. These are three of the organisms that we want to, of course, prevent from getting into our lakes or prevent from getting out from the lakes they're already in, getting into other lakes. So these are zebra mussel, Asian clam, and the really medieval and creepy looking water chestnut on the bottom. I don't think I would actually wear any of these, but they look pretty in necklace format. Road salt is one of our most important pollutants in our aquatic realm. We use a tremendous amount of salt on our roads, and it is getting into our aquatic systems and causing a number of impacts. There are, of course, human health impacts. I just chose to represent the potential threat to amphibians in this particular piece. So this is a frog that is wearing the chloride data from Rich Lake right in the center of the Adirondacks. This is one of the lakes that we are seeing a significant increasing chloride trend. And so this is, again, a large area of research for us here at AWI. And this is just me illustrating, that this is problematic for amphibian communities as well as humans and humans who need clean water. Here is a piece that has to do with microplastics, which we don't do much research on ourselves, but Danielle Garneau and her students have done quite a bit of microplastic work here in Lake Champlain. This is just a plain sort of stockinette square of knitting. It says plastic. If you can't read it, it's sort of this meant to look like this retro 50s-ish kind of font, which is the time that plastic production in this country sort of really went kind of crazy. These were like some old ugly plastic beads that my son had left over from some dumb toy. I don't know. So to the extent that there is data in this, it is that the number of stitches in that piece is right around 10,500, which is within the range of the number of microplastic particles that get deposited in Lake Champlain every day at the places where such things are monitored, which is not everywhere, but at the wastewater treatment facilities, for example, where there are the capability to monitor such things. That is how many, particles of microplastics are going into the lake every day. So that's what 10,500 knitted stitches looks like anyway.
So are you saying that the source for the plastics is with the rendering plants?
No, I'm just saying that.
I'm just curious where they were mostly coming from.
So Danielle's work has looked at that a little bit, and I think there are a variety of different sources. Our clothing, certainly, depending on what it's made out of, can be a source of microplastics. Garbage, there's lots and lots of different sources, and probably somebody here at the Basin Program knows much better than I do about it. But yeah, it's sort of Fleece, right, yeah. Yeah, I think it's similar to mercury in that everywhere you look for microplastics, you can find them. So, of course, as you might imagine, climate data are one of the richest sources and you know, things that we can draw upon in this project, both because we're always collecting climate data on a daily, you know, day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour basis. And because it lends itself really well to colors. We all relate very well to sort of thinking about how weathermen talk about the weather and represent things on maps. And so temperature and climate and precipitation work really well with this project. And we have a couple of different pieces that illustrate this. These are a few examples, some from sort of our project directly and some from another project that existed before ours called the Tempestry Project. And that is a similar sort of data art project that is trying to do very similar things to what we are trying to do, but all about climate change. The Tempestry Project is a group of folks that took what knitters were already doing. Knitters, crocheters have been making temperature blankets for a long time. It's just something that they find interesting to do. And what they did is just to sort of standardize that process and say, okay, let's do this in a way that we're all using the same weather data and we're all using the same color schemes and sort of matching the temperatures to those color schemes and those yarns, such that anybody who makes what's called a tempestry can compare theirs to anyone else in the country. So there are, for example, tempestry collections for individual locations like the city of Philadelphia. There is a tempestry collection for, you know, all one that it has a tempestry for every national park in the country. And so what you see in a tempestry is the daily maximum temperature every day of the year. So one row is what the daily maximum temperature was for a year. So most folks will make two of them so that they can compare one year perhaps of significance to them to another year that might be significant and see whether or not there were any changes. So the two on the bottom are sort of classic examples of that. The left one is Long Lake. I won't remember what years they're for. Left one is Long Lake. The right one is Lake Placid, and they were done by two friends of ours that are, you know, representing significant years in their lives. So those are sort of Tempestry Project examples. The one on the top is on loan to us from the same folks. That's called the Paleo, and it is not a daily temperature record. It is instead a record of departure from long-term climate normals. So it's representing sort of craziness of, you know, how far are we off of the long-term trends? And it's 20 feet long because it goes back to the year 1. It was done from paleo data. And they have loaned it to us and we have it right now included in our exhibit. Similarly, the dress that I made is also a representation of deviation from long-term normals. So each row in that dress, I won't remember the years again, I think it starts in 1880 or 1885 to 2019, I think was when I finished that. Each row represents what that year looked like, global information in this case, not local like the other ones are, how far we were either above or below sort of the long-term trends. And as you might imagine, as we get toward the bottom, we're getting sort of warmer and warmer away from long-term temperatures. That's a dress that I actually made a couple of years ago at the time when all of Australia was on fire and Greta was sailing across the ocean to go to climate meetings in New York. And I was in a place of such despair that I wanted to, I don't know, make something to acknowledge that. And I wanted it to be something I could wear. So I made it in a dress format and to wear to climate marches. And I have done that. And I have been too hot in it in climate marches in September, which I guess is the point. There was a time when I could have worn a yarn dress in September in the Adirondacks. I can't really do that anymore. Here's a few for winter. Winter is my favorite season. I love the winter. And so you'll see lots of winter stuff represented in this project. The Champlain Ice Scarf, again, is if you take a look at the State of the Lake report, you'll see the ice record for Lake Champlain and the extent to which the lake either freezes or in this day and age doesn't freeze completely. So what this shows is, I can actually show you because I have an example of it right here. This is the lighter color are years when the lake froze, and the darker color are years when the lake did not freeze completely, which is happening more and more often as we move through time. This is one that several people have made. The version of it that I made also has some white beads in it. If you can see in the lighter colored yarn, the beads are in one of three columns representing whether if it was a year that the lake did freeze it freeze in January or February or March, which is also sort of shifting later. So it's oftentimes not freezing completely. And when it does freeze, it's often freezing later than it used to. So that's the Champlain Ice Scarf.
Is there any way to start point and point, or is it just a notation created?
All of the details about each of these is on our website, and in the exhibit, it has the years on the card. I believe this record, somebody from the Basin program might know the year that this record starts. It's like 18. It's in the report. I can go look at it, but late 1800s to now. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Very good.
Yeah, it's on the little card with the display. I forget the years, and I've played with way too many data sets at this point to ever remember all these years for it, but everything you could want to know is on the card with the display or on our website. Here is the snow scarf. This is a representation of snowfall at Wanakina. Snow in general doesn't show quite as consistent of a trend. Precipitation in general, but also snowfall doesn't show as consistent of a trend as temperatures do in terms of increasing and decreasing. But this is one of the locations within the Adirondack Park where we have seen a significant decline, a small one but significant decline of total snowfall at that weather station. And so I just took the snow record for Wanakina and put it on a scarf. This is a fun example of something that I often will recommend to people, of sort of making the background piece first and then adding the data afterwards. You don't have to necessarily create something new. You could take an old scarf that you already have that's plain and add some data to it. Take an old sweater that you have and add some data to it. So that's an example of that kind of an approach. Here's a piece that has to do with ice fishing. For some reason that I don't really understand, I appreciate ice fishing very much, even though I hardly ever do it, but it's one of those things I fantasize about doing if I ever get to retire. I love living in a place where ice fishing exists. I love driving by and seeing shanties on the lake. It just is, I don't know, comforting to me for whatever reason. And so I wanted to do a piece that had to do with ice fishing. This similarly is a record that shows winters since I think, I'll forget the year, 1897 maybe. Going till now, you sort of read it like a book. Each hole is meant to make you think about a hole in the ice for ice fishing, but also one of those winters from top to bottom. And the ones with blue around them are winters during which the mean temperature in sort of northern New York and eastern Vermont was above 25 degrees, which is the temperature that Leslie Knoll and her colleagues have found that ice fishing derbies and contests often get canceled because the ice becomes unsafe. I couldn't find a specific record of when that has happened. It certainly happens in our region, but I couldn't find any consistent database of it. But I just took the threshold from that particular study and applied it to the climate data for where we are. So those are, in theory, winters where we too would have had a threat to our ice fishing competitions as a result of a warming climate. That was a piece that was in the Save Winter exhibit in the Lake Placid Center for the Arts that was held as a add-on to the World University Games that the Lake Placid just hosted in January, and it won third place in that art exhibit. So that was really exciting.
Are the rows supposed to be months, years, what?
Each circle is a winter, so years.
Oh, here.
Yep. I know some of you know Dan Spada. Dan Spada is a person I have known my whole life, and he is becoming an ambassador for Nordic skating. He luckily is retired. This is another activity that I want to take up in my retirement. My retirement is really dependent on ice, so I'm hoping we still have some by the time I retire. This is a sweater that represents Dan's skating trips on Lake Champlain between 2015 and 2022. I just love the videos that he posts on Facebook all the time, and I particularly am sort of intrigued by the ones that he posts that look kind of like that. That doesn't capture it quite as well as I would like to, but you know, where he's skating on black ice that just looks so scary, but so much fun. And he's got this, you know, spreadsheet with 27 tabs of every skating trip he's taken and all over the place. And I couldn't remotely fit them all in one piece, but I could fit the data for Lake Champlain. And so those are the years 2015 to 2022. Each sort of year is represented by a column of what's supposed to make you think about skating tracks on black ice. And the height is how many trips Dan took skating on Lake Champlain in each of those years. Not so much a scientific record, because of course we know that might be influenced by things other than climate, like whether or not Dan wants to go skating on any given day. But at the same time, I appreciate him so much. I appreciate what he's doing for that sport in our region. And it was super fun to make. I think this might be my last example from the winter time. This is one I just did. This is a graphic that Kurt Steger, I'm sure you know Kurt Steger also, maybe some of you know him, posted on Facebook and said, wouldn't it be cool if somebody represented this in fiber? And so I couldn't resist that challenge. This is called Old Time Cold, and it is a representation of days in Indian Lake when we reached temperatures of what we would characterize now maybe as old time cold, when it got to be -20 or colder. So his record goes back to 1900 to 2020. He's got December, January, February, March. My scarf is only February, and it only goes back to 1930 because I ran out of yarn. But, but again, in that scarf, each little tiny square is a February day, starting in my case, 1933 to now, 2023. And the little squares that I have the little blue on top of are days that we had sort of that old time cold. We can definitely see a pattern of us losing that. I think we all felt that this winter a lot, that, you know, when it did get that cold, it's kind of, this is fun to have it be super cold again for a day. Never seems to last very long.
Wait, so these were all knitted versus crocheted?
This was knitted, and then I actually wove on top of the knitting afterwards. Yep, that one. That's
None of them were crocheted.
a lot of them have been crocheted. Yeah.
I can tell. I would like to learn how to crochet. I know how to knit, but I can't quite tell.
I can show you, and you can also look at our website. There are quite a lot of them are crocheted.
Where that location?
This is Indian Lake. Days in Indian from that weather station data that it got to be -20 or colder. So those are all things that I made. But I want to show you examples of things that other folks have made as a part of this project, because at this point I think I have at least a contact list with about 60 people on it, and probably 25 or 30 of them are in some way active, have made a piece or are working on a piece that I'm aware of, which is just, it blows my mind. I appreciate so much that people are getting into this. So Melinda is another example of someone I think is so creative. She went to a thrift shop, found that crochet dress and added the data to it. So what's on the dress, it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, is the proportion of native and non-native plants that we found in aquatic invasive species plant surveys in Taylor Pond. So the green is the proportion in any given sort of plant stand that we were doing aquatic surveys in. Green is native and black is non-native. My mom, who is one of my best participants, made a shawl that represents the birds that live in the marsh. She lives on Spada Lake. The birds that live in the marsh near her, it's just a shawl that has sort of sections on it. We made sure there were 12 of them to represent the 12 months of the year. And then we logged it to eBird and downloaded the bird information for how many birds show up in her marsh in any given month of the year. And it's hard to see on my small picture here, but there are little beads in there to represent sort of the species richness in Spada Marsh over the course of the year. Northern New York Audubon, I should mention, funded us specifically to highlight birds as a part of this project. And I spend a lot of my time studying birds, so I'm thrilled to have bird projects. Hallie Bond does beautiful work with embroidery and quilt making, and she does this kind of cool method of taking, in this case, white water lily, but the actual plant, and sort of pounding it right onto the fabric that she's working on. And then she made that piece and incorporated embroidery to represent the thread of milfoil to our native plants like water lily or other native plants. Priscilla is underneath my face, but she did one of the Champlain ice scarves. My friend Valerie created that headband. I've never seen it in person, but she sent me a picture of it. It's got data from the Catskills where she is. She's got stream data. Donna and Cindy made this wonderful interactive sort of piece that has little pockets inside of which are little boats made with birch bark, and a proportion of those, when you pull the boat out of the pocket, this is a great one for little kids, you find milfoil. You find the sort of green stuff that's supposed to represent the proportion of lakes that have been surveyed that we have found milfoil in Adirondack Lake specifically. Heidi did one of the tapestries. Susan did this beautiful needle felted representation of European frogbit, another invasive species. She told me she's never needle felted before, and then she handed me this gorgeous piece. Anne has done a couple of different scarves. Anne is our first Vermonter. She did this Champlain scarf, and she also did two other scarves. The left one in the top corner there is peatland fires in Siberia. I don't remember the record, but representing the proportion, the sort of megatons of carbon that are getting released into the environment from huge fires that occurred in 2019 in Siberia. The one on the right has to do with spring and ice out on Lake Sunapee. Hallie did some of the tapestries. Laura did this gorgeous weaving. This is bird data from a cool website that Cornell maintains called BirdNet, which you can log into at any time and look at the number of birds that are projected to be migrating overhead on any given night of the year. So she looked at data for Essex County and picked 12 species of birds that I can't read and can't remember all of them, but and wove the information for sort of the migration patterns over Essex County all throughout the year. I think it was for 2022. Sarah, again, is unfortunately underneath me, but she made that a beautiful sweater that has the Mirror Lake ice record on the bottom of it. Joy, here's another representation of Mirror Lake. That is the Mirror Lake ice out or ice in record, and showing that the sort of ice in on Mirror Lake is getting later and later. And she put a loon on top of it to represent the threat that we are seeing, and I know is happening in Champlain too, of loons. You know, they don't leave until they can't get to their food anymore. So if there's no ice, the loons can still fish and they will stay. And sometimes they get trapped in places where they don't necessarily want to be when the ice is coming in and out. And then the eagles, unfortunately, will just kind of hang around and wait for the opportunity to have a loon lunch. So that is what Joy is representing here. This is another one. Carolyn's is also showing the ice in record on Mirror Lake. This is a rug hooking piece, and the warmer colors showing the later dates at which Mirror Lake is freezing over the years. Kirsten's is a weaving of data from the North American Breeding Bird Survey, which is one of the longest records of bird data. Continental records, it goes back to 1966 is when that started, and she chose 4 raptor species to represent in there. So there's kestrel, osprey, red-tailed hawk, and northern harrier in that weaving, which is about 8 feet long. And Jennifer took some data from my long-term boreal bird monitoring, in this case for boreal chickadee, representing when we are finding or not finding that species in peatlands in the Adirondacks going back about 15 years. We've also had the chance to work with kids. For example, we had some students that came to the Adirondack Youth Climate Summit at the Wild Center in Tupper Lake this past November. Tom and our colleague Nadia from the Finger Lakes Institute took them outside and taught them about some simple water quality testing parameters. They tested pH and temperature. I forget what else they did in that time. And then we brought them inside and we gave them some data. And in about 45 minutes, they represented the transparency data for 8 lakes in Hamilton County. So those are 8 lakes in which we are seeing a significant decline in transparency in Hamilton County. They had to sort of take the information on the sheet and match it to the colors of wool balls and string it and hang it on their stick. And now they are a permanent part of our exhibit. So those are high schoolers from all over the region. Similarly, this December, we partnered with a group in Saranac Lake called ADK Art Rise, and we brought the entire 3rd grade from Petrova Elementary in 3 installments to downtown Saranac Lake. Tom taught them all about acid rain and pH, and we had them similarly match information for lakes to look at how pH in our lakes had changed since the original lake survey, and newer information that we have collected more recently, and look at how lakes have recovered as a result of improvements in acid rain. So that's a brief, or maybe not so brief, tour of the exhibit. I tend to focus a lot on the negative story, so I wanted to end with a positive story. And this is a piece that's not from our region, but I made it because it has significance to me. When I was growing up, my grandparents lived in Cuyahoga Falls, and so I wanted to do a piece having to do with that river. But I think that everyone in here has seen pictures of it when it caught on fire. It caught on fire multiple times, but it is sort of one of those icons of sort of the worst kind of situation in our aquatic environments. But at the same time, an illustration of what can happen when we do sort of enact the right sorts of efforts to protect water quality. So this is a representation of the river, sort of, if you might imagine it getting healthier from top to bottom, and each of those sort of little panels on the right mark some significant event in the history of the river, starting with, formed by glaciers, going through the age of industrialism when everything was getting dumped and it was sort of a garbage pile. The fire that sort of galvanized a lot of action, including, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act and amendments to it that became the Clean Water Act. And ultimately, now all kinds of positive things, including, a national park. And my favorite is the last one, the river otter coming back to downtown Cuyahoga Falls after being absent for 100 years. So when I show this piece, people have said to me, that reminds me of the bouquet and the return of the salmon. You can think of it as whatever system you want to. The point is just that, when we do the kinds of things that we know how to do, and we have the ability to enact them, we can sort of have great recovery of our aquatic system. So I'll leave you on that more positive note. I will also tell you that if you are interested in the project and want to learn more about it, our website has sort of everything that you can imagine. That QR code is in the exhibit. It actually works. If you stand far enough away from it, it will actually take you to our website. But there's the real address if you want to go there. There's a bunch of sort of background information on the project. There are a number of ways in which you can get involved. There is a virtual tour, so you can click on there and get to a page that will tell you about all of the projects that I just described. And we'll also, I'm slowly adding other folks' work onto there as well. There are some videos that explain the project, and most importantly, there's a couple of buttons at the bottom that you can click and fill out a form that will email me, or you can just email me directly from my email on the bottom of the website. Similarly, there's a button you can click that goes to something called the ideas folder, and that will take you to a place where you can get data sets to play with. You can read documents where I try to explain sort of how you might go about doing this. I will be your largest enabler if you're at all interested. I'll help you find a data set. I'll help you develop a project, or you could just create something that we already have got a project for. And we're continually sort of adding things and adding tools and ways to get involved in that to our website. So take a look there if you are interested. I hope that you are. There are no official assignments. There are no official timelines. There's nothing I specifically want you to make. My only goal is for people to have fun, with a side effect of being, warm and fashionable. Thank you.